الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على سيد الحبيب المصطفى وعلى آله وصحبه نجوم الهدى قادة التقى ما بعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We are continuing with Imam al-Bukhari radiyallahu anhu's book Adabul Mufrad, where he is focusing initially on emphasizing the rights of the parents and being dutiful towards them. The next chapter Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu brings is Babun yabarru walidayhi ma lam yakun ma'asiyah. And Imam al-Bukhari radiyallahu anhu is emphasizing how important it is to be dutiful to the parents. Now, the parents can tell their offspring, tell their child to do one of three things. If the thing that they're telling them to do is something fard, then that action is fard anyway, so they have to carry that out. The second option is if the parents are telling their child to do something mustahab, something which is permissible. Now, because of the order of the parents, now that action becomes compulsory upon the child to act upon. And the third option is when the parents tell the child or the offspring to do something which is against the laws of Islam, something which is haram. Now, of course, in that case, you must not act upon that despite it being the order of the parents. That is what Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu was emphasizing under this chapter. So he brings a riwayah, he brings a narration by Abu Darda radiyallahu anhu. Now, Abu Darda radiyallahu anhu had two wives, and both were called Darda. The first one is called Darda Kubra, and after she passed away, he got married to somebody else, and she was known as Darda Sughra, the smaller Darda. Now, Darda radiyallahu anha is a great narrator of ahadith. She's obviously a female, and despite that, she narrates ahadith from many of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, including her husband Abu Darda radiyallahu anhu. The reason I'm emphasizing this point is because the concept of spreading ilm, to be involved in knowledge of deen, isn't just restricted for the males. Rather, we see the sahabiyat radiyallahu ta'ala anhun, they also excelled in this field. In fact, some sahabiyat radiyallahu anhun, they mention that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would read ayat in the khutbah of Jum'ah, we memorized surahs of the Quran just because the Prophet ﷺ recited them on the khutbah, on the minbar. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them that intelligence, and they would spread the ilm and spread deen using the intelligence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them. So moving on, she narrates from her husband Abu Darda radiyallahu anhu. He says, Awsani Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam bitis'in. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam advised Abu Darda radiyallahu anhu of 9 things. The first one, لا تشرك بالله شيئا وإن قطعت أو حرقت. Never ever commit shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it be a situation where you're going to be burnt, or it's a situation where you're going to end up mutilated. Now, of course, the Quran gives rukhsa and flexibility. If your life is under risk, if you're under fear of death, that Allah tells us, إِلَّا مَنْ أُكْرِهَ وَقَلْبُهُ مُطْمَئِنٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. You're allowed to utter words of kufr just to save your life. But in reality, you're believing in Allah, but you're allowed to say these words just to save your life. But this is a flexibility. Of course, the most virtuous thing to do in that situation is both inwardly and outwardly display your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam knew that Abu Darda is a very muttaqi sahabi, so that's why he told him to act upon the more virtuous option, which is to always inwardly and outwardly display the kalima and tawheed. The next one, وَلَا تَتْرُكَنَّ الصَّلَاةَ الْمَكْتُوبَةَ مُتَعَمِّدًا. Never ever leave fard salah intentionally. وَمَنْ تَرَكَهَا مُتَعَمِّدًا بَرِئَتْ مِنْهُ الذِّمَّةِ. In an Islamic khilafah, an Islamic rule, there is something called dhimma, where the Islamic and Muslim government takes responsibility of each of the Muslims in their governance. Somebody that misses their salah muta'ammidan intentionally, that responsibility is taken away and removed off that person. This is what Rasulullah ﷺ is explaining over here. The next one, وَلَا تَشْرَبَنَّ الْخَمْرِ. Do not ever drink wine, alcohol. فَإِنَّهَا مِفْتَاحُ كُلِّ شَرٍ. It is the key for all evil. We know when people drink alcohol, they get intoxicated. They're unable to think, they're unable to comprehend what they're doing, and they end up doing things which they regret and they should not be doing. And the reason Imam Bukhari brings the hadith is this part, وَأَطِعْ وَالِدَيْكَ, and obey your parents. وَإِنْ أَمَرَاكَ أَن تَخْرُجْ مِنْ دُنْيَاكَ فَخْرُجْ لَهُمَا. If they tell you to leave for a matter of the dunya, then you leave. So if there's a deedy matter, they tell you pray your salah in the masjid, then moreover you should do amal on that. If they tell you go to the shop, buy something, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is expressing over here that even then you do amal upon the orders of your parents. The next, Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu mentions, وَلَا تُنَازِعَنَّ وُلَاةَ الْأَمْرِ. Do not fight with the governors and the leaders. وَإِنْ رَأَيْتَ أَنَّكَ أَنْتَ. Even if you think your opinion is right, you're in the correct position, even then you do not fight with the leaders of the Muslims. Because it causes disunity. The purpose of having a khilafah, the purpose of having a Muslim ruler is the Muslims are united under one person. Now everyone's giving their own opinions and acting upon their own views, it causes disunity. وَلَا تَفْرُرْ مِنَ الزَّحْفِ وَإِنْ هَلَكْتَ وَفَرَّ أَصْحَابُكَ. And do not ever run away from a battlefield. وَأَنْفِقْ مِنْ طَوْلِكَ عَلَى أَهْلِكَ. And whatever extra wealth you have remaining, you spend that upon your family. And Nabi alayhi salam mentions elsewhere, كُلُّ مَعْرُوفٍ صَدَقَةٍ. Every single good deed is a sadaqah. Spending on your own family is also a sadaqah. وَلَا تَرْفَعْ عَصَاكَ عَنْ أَهْلِكَ. Do not raise the stick upon your family. i.e., you do not need to be violent over them. And Nabi alayhi salam mentions, وَأَخِفْهُمْ فِي اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَ. You warn them to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you should not excessively use the stick upon people and cause violence. The next hadith Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu brings, we have covered already. A man came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to pledge allegiance over hijrah, but he had left his parents crying. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, you go back to your parents, and because you made them cry, now you go back, make them smile, make them happy, make them laugh, and then you can return to pledge allegiance towards me. Next, Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu brings a narration where a man came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and says, I want to go for jihad. I want to go out and fight in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks him, Ahayyun walidak, are your parents alive? The Sahabi radiyallahu anhu responds and says, yeah, my parents are alive. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells him, فَفِيهِمَا فَجَاهِدْ. Instead of going out in jihad in the path of Allah, serving your parents is your form of jihad, is your form of going out in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So not every individual is able to go out in jihad. Likewise, not every individual may be able to go out in jama'ah and tabligh. Not every individual is able to go out and seek knowledge and ilm. So Allah's Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam has also showed us other options where we can gain a similar reward without having to go through the same difficulties and mashaqqa. The next bab Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu brings is Babun man adraka walidayhi falam yadkhulil jannah. The chapter regarding that individual who has parents, yet he does not enter Jannah. Now this may seem strange, of course everybody has parents, but Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu is emphasizing that if a person has parents, which everybody does, then that is a very, very, very easy opportunity for you to gain Jannah. And Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam mentions in this hadith, رَغِمَ أَنْفُهُ رَغِمَ أَنْفُهُ رَغِمَ أَنْفُهُ. May that person be disgraced. He says this 3 times. Literally what this word means is, may that person's nose be rubbed on the ground in soil. So Nabi alayhi salam says this statement 3 times. The Sahaba radiyallahu anhu are asking, Ya Rasulullah, who are you talking about? Who is this person that should be disgraced? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentions, Man adraka walidayhi indahu al-kibar aw ahadahuma fadakhala an-nar. That individual whose parents grow old by him, that individual who has one parent who grows old by him, and despite that opportunity for khidmah, he still ends up going Jahannam. Nabi alayhi salam says, that person is disgraced. رَغِمَ أَنْفُهُ. His nose should meet with the ground in disgrace. And another narration when Nabi alayhi salam mentions similar words relevant to everyone right now, الَّذِي أَدْرَكَ رَمَضَانَ فَلَمْ يُغْفَرْ لَهُ. May that person be disgraced who finds himself in the month of Ramadan, and despite that he does not gain the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, during this month, may He give us the opportunity to turn towards Him, at least in asking for forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may He forgive us all for our shortcomings. The very next chapter, a very short hadith which we'll end on, Babun man barra walidayhi zadallahu fi umrihi. Imam Bukhari radiyallahu anhu brings a narration in his chapter, and he says that individual who is dutiful towards his parents, zadallahu fi umrihi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant him barakah inside his age, inside his lifetime. Nabi alayhi salam mentions, Man barra walidayhi tuba lahu. Whoever is dutiful to their parents, glad tidings be towards him. May a part of Jannah be dedicated towards that person. And he says, زَادَ اللَّهُ فِي عُمُرِهِ. For that person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase his age and increase his life in this world. This could mean literally, where Allah literally increases a person's life, or it could mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants barakah in that person's life, such that in a short amount of time in the world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes a lot of work from that person, and that person is able to leave behind a legacy. Such we see the scholars that passed before us. Al-Imam al-Nawawi, for example, he had a very short life. But every individual is aware of his book, Riyadul Salihin, a very great work of hadith, and that is one of the many works of Imam al-Nawawi, rahmatullah alayh. Yet he had a very short life, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took great work of deen from him, such that people still mention his name today and make dua and say, rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatan wasi'ah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to be dutiful towards our parents. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from amongst those who make the most out of the month of Ramadan, and at least are able to gain the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the end of this month. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.